Everybody, this is Kate Haley with Glazer's Camera. Welcome to another Glazer's Live session. Today I'm at the store, and sometimes I have hosted these at home, but today I'm here at the store. We have a lot of fun planned for today with Tamron. We're going to talk about shooting handheld DSLR video with a focus on using Tamron lenses. We have Charley Voorhis, who's going to be leading that discussion, and I'm looking forward to this. Before we get started, I would like to talk a little bit about how Glazer's is operating right now. The store is open Monday through Saturday, 9 to 6 Monday through Friday, and 9 to 5 on Saturdays. Our rentals department is also open Monday through Friday, 9 to 6. So with that said, we're going to dive right in. We do have Ben Hutchinson from Tamron on the line, who's going to maybe help answer some questions. Maybe, possibly. But for the most part, Charley's going to be leading this discussion. We have a lot of videos. He's going to talk about his technique. So I'm going to send it over to Charley. Charley, can you tell us a little bit about you and the work you create?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me. Do you want me to share my screen now at this point? Is this...
Yeah. Oh, you said you were going to build in a little bit of your bio into your presentation. So yeah, go for it.
I'll share it right now. Cool. Yeah, so my name's Charley Voorhis, Tamron Image Master and Glazer's renter. I rent a lot of gear from you guys. So this is my team. I own a company called Voortex Productions. We're right in the dead center of Washington State. So it's me there on the left. I've got Alicia McKee and Jeremiah and Aaron. Jeremiah's been working with me for about 8 years, and Alicia's about 4 years in, and Aaron on the right, she's about 2 years in. And then my dog there in the middle, he's the employee morale specialist. So this is our office. We have an old house that we've kind of converted into our studio, and yeah, we stay pretty busy with all that. I started the company in 2004. I was 21 years old at the time. I definitely did not know how to run a company, but I was, I guess, reckless enough to try it. And surprisingly, the company is still still alive after all these years. My logo has evolved, though, to just the basic little V. It was the V in the Voortex back then, and then I simplified it since then. I'm going to talk to you about handheld shooting and essentially what that is to me, like the way that I use it. But my disclaimer is that art is very subjective, and I'm not in any way saying that handheld shooting should be the priority approach to shooting things. I just kind of have my own process that's kind of full of little nuanced techniques that I've kind of honed over the years, and working handheld has become kind of a centric piece in my workflow. So with that said, I just wanted to say that art's very subjective, and these are all just kind of nuggets to put in your own little basket and work from there.
Hey, Charley.
Yeah.
Before we do that, I just want to let people know who are tuning in how they can ask questions during the session real quick, and then we'll get right into this because I'm looking forward to this. If you have questions during the session, please feel free to post those either on the YouTube page or on the Facebook Live page, and we'll go through and ask some of those throughout the session, and then maybe a little bit more towards the end. So if you have questions, don't be shy, okay? And Charley, let's go ahead and get rolling.
Perfect. Yeah, so I have a pretty extensive background in like skateboarding and snowboarding and baseball and basketball. And one of the things that was always kind of drilled into me from an early age was that you've got to build kind of a fundamental or like a foundation of fundamentals before you can really start pushing yourself to kind of a new level. And to me, that is kind of like, what handheld shooting is. Like, I feel like every, videographer or filmmaker, cinematographer, they should have at least a close relationship with their camera. And the best way to do that is just being able to, wield it by hand. So, for those cinematographers out there that are afraid to leave the tripod, I would hope that through the course of this talk, you would feel a little bit more confident to to start exploring some of the other things you can do. I put together 5 tips for getting the most out of handheld shooting. These are only 5 of probably many and many, but these are the 5 that kind of really stood out to me as being significant. First one is to shoot wide-ish, especially as you're first starting to play with it. The wider your lens, the more forgiving, your image is going to be, and so you're going to be able to hold that a little bit more stable visually, because you're casting a wide net onto your scenery, and so the little jitters of your hands and stuff, they're not going to show up as significantly. But I put ish because there's a way to sort of work around that, of which I'll reveal here in just a moment. My cornerstone lens is the Tamron 2470 G2. I use this all the time, and so the wide would be at 24, and that's just a very comfortable handheld focal length. And then I also have the 1530 and the 7200 that I use really regularly as well. And I'm able to shoot all 3 of those lenses handheld, specifically because of the power of VC. That's kind of my secret little superpower that I, just sort of keep in my back pocket. But I feel quite comfortable actually shooting at 200 millimeters on the 7200 completely handheld. Now, given I won't try as many, fluid movements and try to do anything too technical, but just holding it static and zooming in on something is quite capable on the 7200. So VC, vibration compensation. The second tip is to shoot a high frame rate if possible. So a lot of the films that we then export and put online is either in 24 frames per second or sometimes 30 frames per second. If you're able to, set your camera to a higher frame rate, like 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second, first of all, that's going to give you just a lot more information to work with later. So if you're going to use post stabilization, there's just going to be more, reference points for your computer to process and give you a smoother shot. But also you have the opportunity to slow that footage down. So if you shot at 60 frames per second and play it back on a 24 frames timeline, the footage is going to be 2.5 times slower. And that's going to make what used to maybe feel like a shaky shot feel a little bit more fluid and kind of like it's floating. So high frame rate is definitely recommended. It's possible to shoot at 24 frames per second handheld, but you just might run into a couple stabilization issues. Here's a little chart that I grabbed just off of Google to sort of represent that represents how frame rate works. There's no secret. There's just more frames packed into a second, so you just have more content to work with. Know the limits of handheld. One of the things that I see pretty frequently, especially when people first maybe jump on a lens with vibration compensation or some kind of stabilizing mechanism in the lens or their sensor, is that all of a sudden they think that they're a gimbal and they just start running around with it and trying to do shots that are really not meant for a handheld approach. And so knowing your limits and then just trying to maximize your time and energy in inside the range of what handheld is capable of is going to be the most effective way to go about it. I have a gimbal and I use it somewhat frequently, but I choose the time and place to use it appropriately. I personally, I use it and I enjoy it, but I sort of dread when I have to do a production that is primarily gimbal focused, just because frankly, there's just a lot of logistics and there's a lot of time and setup and calibration and balancing and all this stuff that takes away from the creative energy for me. And so I like to really maximize what I can do handheld and then just save the gimbal shots for the times that I really need it. Number 4 would be to make short intentional movements. So, and I'm going to get a little bit more into this later when we start talking about some ergonomics and things, but once you are shooting handheld and you're locked in on something, try not to jolt and jerk around when you're trying to recompose, but see if you can slowly move yourself to a new composition, even within a simple framing that you already have, if you're just kind of going down to the right or the left, but just to try to make really short and intentional movements. For one, if you move it slower, the VC is going to have an opportunity to lock in and kind of help guide you from composition to composition. But if you do whip it, then you sort of throw the VC out of whack for a second, and it has to, you know, grab a hold of a new image. And it's just going to be really hard to stitch together pieces of a shot if you're whipping things around. So really small, smooth, intentional movements. And I find myself doing that a lot when I'm shooting kind of a live scene where I have very little direction, but I'm just kind of capturing a candid moment, but I'm able to be in the moment with them. And here I'm zoomed in at probably 60 millimeters or so. And this guy's talking with students, moving at a free whim. And if he moves out of my composition, I'm just going to move very slowly and try to lock back in on him instead of trying to whip around at his same speed. But it's just a matter of kind of anticipating movement and just keeping yourself constantly moving slowly throughout your composition. Then the last one, and we're going to go over this a little bit more later here too, but moving your body, not your arms, or not your hands. And back in the day, I used to teach at a tech school. I taught the filmmaking program. And so there was a lot of students that I was introducing to filmmaking. And oftentimes in the first couple of weeks, they would go out and start shooting handheld. And I would see some really interesting body positions that they'd put themselves in when they were trying to move to a new shot. And instead of just simply moving your feet or shifting your weight, they would, you know, thrust their upper body out and try to get a shot. And frankly, the shot wouldn't turn out well because it'd be very shaky. But secondly, that kind of movement isn't sustainable. So we'll get a little bit more into that here in a second and talk about some ergonomics. But moving your body is a huge part of handheld shooting. It's almost like, you know, body shooting, not handheld shooting, because essentially your body is the rig, and your hands are just simply where the camera attaches. Here's kind of a good example of using your body and putting your body in the position first, and then, you know, positioning your camera based on what you're able to stabilize from your body. Don't be afraid to get dirty. And for me, so when I'm going out on a long shoot or I have a lot to capture, less is more as far as gear goes. I'm far more powerful and effective when I can just deal with less gear and just really focus in on the action and the characters and the performance, and just kind of wield my simple little tool to just be present in the whole capture. I have a few pros and cons that I'd like to go over with handheld shooting specifically. One pro is that it allows me to work quickly and connect closely with my subjects. A con is that you're running the risk of being shaky and hard to control. And pro, it has an authentic and natural look. And honestly, this is one of the biggest appeals for me. I would like to think that our work has a very, to not use the buzzword too much, but just kind of an authentic feel. We don't use professional actors very often. We oftentimes use real people that do real things, and we just go along for the ride with them and just try to capture, you know, an experience as it unfolds. And handheld just naturally has this participatory feel to it. Like you just sort of feel like you're part of that scene. But the big con, and the one that we're going to go over now, is fatigue. It can be really tiring, especially when you're shooting, you know, a long full day shoots. You know, if you're carrying your camera on the whole time and your body's in charge of capturing all of the images, it can be tiring. So dialing in your ergonomics is going to help you get through some of those longer days. It also might help prevent some chronic injuries that may come from working in this industry for 10 plus years. I know a lot of people that have some shoulder issues and some back issues because they've been cameraman, you know, their whole life, and it can wear on you. So fixing the problem before it becomes too much of an issue is a good way to go. So Devin, if you don't mind playing this first little ergonomics video. So when your arms are stretched way out in front of you, your triceps are going to get really tired. But if you keep your arms close to your chest and your camera nice and close, you're going to be able to sustain that position a lot longer. And then as far as getting stable shots while you're moving, we call this the ninja walk. But you're just going to get a much more stable shot when you just try to walk as smooth as you can. This is the position I was talking about with my students, where they would reach out really weird positions. Your lower back starts to hurt a lot when you do that. But instead, doing a lot of shifting your weight and using your legs. I mean, your quads are way stronger than your arms are. So if you primarily use your quads to move your camera, you're just going to get a lot better result and you'll last longer. So don't do that, but do that. Plus, someone could capture a shot of you and make a sweet GIF out of it or something. And this is a little sequence where I spent maybe 30 seconds grabbing a variety of shots of my dirt bike. And shortly hereafter, there'll be a little image sampler of just a few shots stitched together that just really represents how quickly you can work when you're shooting handheld and how many different compositions you can get in just a few seconds. So there's the footage that was captured during that. And again, getting down and dirty. All right. Oh yeah, you actually played that. That's perfect. So we played number 2 as well, that little handheld sampler. So with all that said, I mean, we're talking a lot about handheld shooting, but that doesn't mean that I don't go in prepared for all sorts of kinds of shots while I'm on location. So planning for a shoot, you know, is a pretty elaborate process, especially when you know that a good portion of it will be handheld, but then there's going to be a few money shots that you're going to have to pull out of the bag. And there's kind of a litany of gear behind those types of shots. So I put together kind of a quick go-to like full day gear list. So, you know, if I'm working a job for a full day and I know that there's going to be, you know, a few hundred shots or several hundred files that come out of this day, this is pretty much the kit that I put together, and I'm more or less ready for anything at that point. And from my understanding, Kate, we'll be posting this list somewhere as well, right?
Yes, that is the plan. We'll put that in the description on the YouTube page.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
So with that said, this is the list that I use, you know, 40 to 60% of the time. I use my camera body and my 24-70, and those are just like, that's like my samurai sword. Like, that's my tool of choice, and I can pretty much just go into any battle and feel totally comfortable with just my camera body and the 24-70. One of the things that, I mean, we're seeing it more and more now in this day and age too, like embracing the handheld look. It seems like everything kind of has this like quote unquote authentic feel to it. Someone let the cat out of the bag that like that was the trick to shoot handheld, and it'll feel like authentic and genuine. But that's just it though. You just, as soon as you start embracing the handheld look, you're going to unleash a lot of power in yourself as a filmmaker and cinematographer. And so with that, I want to show a music video that I put together. And the entire piece was shot handheld with the exception of 2 shots. And we'll go over those 2 at the end. But Devin, if you don't mind playing this video.
Fly on a river, rapids raging in her chest. See her body flying over with a song of wild unrest. River roll down a mountain,
All right. So Devin, if you don't mind, yeah, moving on to the BTS. I've cut together a few shots from the BTS of that film. And as you'll see very clearly, there's just a guy and a camera walking around in the woods, basically. But there's a few intentional points where we wanted to make sure. You can put your coat on for a moment if you'd like. We wanted to make sure that we created a slightly different look for kind of two pivotal scenes in the shoot. But I'll kind of let this play through for just a second and get a little glimpse into just how simple the production actually was. When I say boo, then pretend like you heard something over there and it kind of startles you. And action. Boo. Good, cut. Boo.
Stop.
And then when you look back almost to my camera.
Squint, and then
Yeah,
you
and
say
I'll
boo.
say boo.
And then
Yeah. Go. Cool. Cut. So this was one of the few takes that we used the gimbal on, or the only take we used the gimbal on. Careful though when you're running through the woods. Cut. And then in this take, so we did one take running that was just handheld, and you can see how shaky and kind of, jolty it is going all the way through. And after we reviewed the footage, I opted to set up the gimbal. And so we'll see that take here next. And as you can see how much more stable it is. And the reason I did that, so the first take, quite honestly, like most people would choose the gimbal shot 10 times out of 10 over the shaky one. But if this were a horror film and there was a character chasing her, that first take would actually be way better. A handheld look serves a very intentional purpose. And so we went with the gimbal more specifically to make it feel like she was more internally scared and she was running away from something that was slightly more intangible. But that shaky handheld chase, there could have been a wolf chasing her or, some actual character, and that would have been the version to use if that were the instance. So we made that creative decision to change to a gimbal.
Ask him about this.
Sorry?
Oh, I didn't know my audio was on.
Oh, that's okay.
Thanks, Devin. No, I'm curious about something. So I saw you climbing that ladder, and your camera's in your hand, and you're carefully cradling it in the nook of your elbow. You don't have even a hand strap on that thing. How many times have you dropped? We saw you trip with the gimbal, which totally.
Yeah.
But so not even a hand strap or anything when you're taking. That's kind of a risk. I mean, I know your camera's tough. I know Tamron lenses are tough, but so I'm curious.
Certainly not recommended. I'm not gonna stand up here and recommend going rogue and go strapless. I honestly do usually have a strap. I think just in that instance, the creative energy got ahead of me and I just went for it.
Right. No, I totally get that, but I was totally curious.
You should definitely use a strap. The gimbal trip, that was one of 2 times in my whole life that I've fallen with the gimbal. So
it's bound to happen.
Thing either.
I mean, you're running through a forest. We've all seen that movie.
So definitely go to Glazer's and buy some really awesome camera straps.
There we go.
Don't ever not use it.
Just saying. But anyhow, okay, I was just really curious, and that was really awesome to see. So thank you for sharing that. And we'll keep going.
Yeah. So Devin, before you play this next video, I'd like to kind of give a quick little prelude into the scenario. So this particular client had a really ambitious idea, and we asked for their wish list, and they gave this just wildly outlandish wish list that seemingly could be or should be impossible to capture in one day. But I decided that we should just try to take it on, and we did our best to logistically kind of lay out like one epic day of production and shoot everything that was asked of us. We started at 4 a.m. and we went until about 9:30 p.m. And at times we'd break into 2 crews and then come back to 1. And ultimately I wanted to see if we could pull it off. And secondly, I knew that we were going to have to be really strategic about how we shot it and the approach that we, went for. And so obviously handheld became a very big piece to our production approach, yet still using some gimbals and a few drones and a few other just pieces of gear that would accomplish a specific look we were going for. But I guess just when watching this, remember that we shot it all literally in one day and coordinated all of the schedules of everybody involved to be part of this project. So I'm really proud of the piece, most specifically because we pulled it off. So if you don't mind playing it, and we'll chat for a second afterwards as well.
It's a series of choices. Do you hit snooze or the gym? Do you stay out or stay late? I didn't get here by accident. I got here with commitment, sweat, sacrifice, and some tears. I'm here because I do what others won't. I work, I push. My future will not be handed to me. It will be earned. The path to my success is mine to create, and I will pave it with vision and ambition. I am prepared to do what is necessary to achieve on the court, on the field, on the mound, on the pitch, and in the classroom. I will get help along the way, coaches, teammates, professors, who will recognize the look of confidence, of dedication. I will surround myself with others like me who will push me to strive, to be and achieve more. This will be my team. It won't be easy. There will be choices. But I will stare down and answer life's choices as I always have, with laser focus and unwavering commitment. And this is how my future is earned.
So yeah, I mean, as you could tell, that was kind of a haul of a production, and there was a lot of moving parts. But really, the secret ingredient to all of it was being present with every single scene and just trying to maximize, every opportunity you had. And so, being comfortable shooting handheld was really what led me into thinking that we could even pull that off, to begin with. So, I have a couple behind the scenes photos to share from that. Even though it's handheld, there's still a significant piece of gear involved with this photo. We had a lot of just kind of logistical foresight of how we're going to accomplish these things, but then there's a lot that's still out of our control. And when you're following sports specifically, you can ask them to do something generally, but to get them to do it, technically exact every single time, that would be required if you're using a gimbal or something more elaborate is unrealistic. So being able to adapt to a scene and quickly recompose based on how things are unfolding in front of you was the main piece to the approach. And then we didn't plan it, but there was just an epic thunderstorm that night that led to a ton of rain during the baseball scene, which I frankly loved. They asked if we wanted to cancel and or reschedule, and I was like, no way, let's just shoot this in the rain. That'd be awesome. And of course, I drenched my gear. So Tamron's got some pretty awesome weather sealed lenses that survive this type of production. Here's another quick one. This is a short little video that I also have a couple BTS shots to go along with as well. This was kind of on the other side. You know, that previous video, we had an entire day to shoot something. This video, we had about 15 minutes to shoot something. So being able to work as quickly as possible while still getting a variety of compositions that told the full story was sort of the problem we were faced there. And we were able to do basically 2 passes at this scene. And so I opted to do one handheld and then do one on the gimbal. And then you can stitch them together. So Devin, if you don't mind playing this one, and then we'll show the BTS right after. BTS of that, and just sort of the chaos that went into getting some of these shots. So as one could imagine, this sort of production can get pretty expensive pretty quickly. You can't exactly have a medical helicopter hanging out up on the landing strip for very long. While running their blades. And so, like I said, we had about a 15-minute window to go in and grab all the content that we could and get out of there. So if we were messing around with sliders and gimbals and things the entire time, I don't think we would have been able to get the amount of content that we got. You also might have picked up on a few wider shots. I had 2 other cameramen positioned on rooftops of different buildings, filming the approach of the helicopter. And that just kind of checked some of those wide shot boxes that I wasn't able to get while I was up on the platform. I think we're ready for the next video here. So that shoot, we had about 4 hours to go on this, little adventure and capture everything we needed for that production. So that the entire piece was shot in about 4 hours, using myself, my dirt bike, a case full of lenses, and then I had a drone that I put in a backpack. And I just went out and did that completely solo. And my dirt bike is sort of outfitted to be a little mobile production vehicle, specifically for shoots like that. We live in the middle of a lot of mountains and wilderness area, and so a bike like that gives me access to all over. But again, it was just sort of a combination of wielding the tools that I had at my disposal and making the most out of shooting handheld and capturing the scenes as they were evolving and changing quickly. That's a little beanbag that I have mounted to the back of my bike that doubles as kind of a tripod. So,
well, I'm looking at that, and it looks like a pretty cool setup, and it also reminds us that we can improvise, and we need to improvise often.
Yeah, I mean, that's really the name of the game, especially when you're working on a budget or working, when you're building content outside of your means, you just improvise. You just got to get creative and use what you have and try to maximize the potential. So zoom in a little bit there for a second. And then this is another piece that's kind of on the other side of the spectrum as far as intensity goes. But for me as a filmmaker, looking back over the last 15 years or so, this is one of the moments that just stands out for me of just like pure magic, like just being in the right place at the right time. Nothing about this scene was staged. It was, my client and I were working through this plantation, and we heard this music off in the distance, and so we just sort of gravitated toward this scene and got approval from the workers manager, I guess, that we could capture this scene for the film we were doing. And it all just sort of unfolded very naturally and organically. And I didn't have much gear on me at the time. It was just kind of running around handheld, and I had a field recorder. And we were able to do the introduction to this documentary that I made here in this scene, if you don't mind.
Burundi is one of the poorest countries in the world, yet they have the opportunity to grow some of the best coffee in the world.
The heart of...
So I cut it off early. If you want to see the whole film, you can find it on my website, but that's just the quick little intro. One thing though that kind of made that for me, obviously the music was really powerful to me, that on its own, but I wanted to give it a slightly more produced feel. And so I ended up giving the file to an audio engineer friend of mine, and essentially had him build a little bit of a score underneath it and add some reverb on the back end of the singing. And it turned into just this thing that, kind of lifted your spirit as you're watching it, at least for me. And, the soundtrack is such a huge and important thing that can really hold the foundation of a story. And so with a really captivating score or a captivating soundscape, shaky no longer matters. Like people watch it and they're not analyzing the visual technique as much as they're just kind of sucked into the film. And so that's something to sort of think about, especially when you're looking back at your own footage or, you know, reviewing content. Like, don't completely disregard a shot if there's a big wobble in there or something, because that might be the charm that brings that, you know, next level of authenticity. I'm speaking specifically about one of the very last shots in there. There's kind of a big shake, and I don't know if anyone noticed or cared, but I remember when I first saw the footage, I was reviewing it on the Jeep ride back to our spot, and I was like, ah, dang it. Like, I was so upset with myself that I let it bump and stumble so much. But now it's in the film, and it doesn't bother me at all, because the whole piece is just, it's refined around it. And then my last little show and tell here is a piece I did recently in one of several pieces I recently did in Peru. Oh, I wanted to show my little gear real fast. So all I had, again, was a handheld and this little Zoom H4n that I just kind of placed in the middle of the group, pressed record, and then backed away. And then we were able to build that whole scene just off of these two pieces of gear. And so, yeah, now back to the Peru piece. I went to the Amazon rainforest of Peru for 8 days, and my goal was to shoot 4 marketing pieces for Peru to use for tourism. And I don't know if anyone's been to the Amazon, but it's not the easiest place to really do anything. It's pretty intense. So I traveled really light, and I worked off of basically as little gear as I could get away with. But yeah, so this next piece is a little 30-second spot for Peru.
Peru's rainforest, the heartbeat that connects us with nature. 1,000 beating hearts, slow, fast, night and day. In the water, sky, tree, and village. Each beat connected to another. Like drummers, we are all playing the same tune, in sync with each other, unique and united, together, forever.
So I wanted to show a little embarrassing behind the scenes photo of that shoot. I don't know if you can see how completely drenched I am in sweat, but I'm pretty sure I sweat nonstop for the entire 8 days I was there. But I have a backpack with a few lenses in it, a small drone. I'm holding the camera, and I'm holding some sticks with the telephoto. And that was essentially, you know, the gear that I worked myself through the production with. I don't try to shoot the 150-600 handheld very frequently. I can shoot it at 150 handheld, but I usually keep that on a tripod ready to go, especially when you're seeing monkeys and dolphins and things like that. Like, you want to have a nice, stable, shot to get that type of stuff. So, so this is kind of the simple little powerhouse when you're going out on for adventure filmmaking. But when I work closer to my truck, I tend to build out my handheld rig a little bit more elaborately. So I, put on a matte box, and I can rig up a monitor and audio recording devices and things, but I can still shoot this handheld, quite comfortably. But I like to be close to, I guess kind of home base, if you will, where I have all the rest of my gear. But I wouldn't take this backpacking for, a full day or multi-day production. I put together a little production mode spectrum though, and I think mostly I just put this together for me to kind of interpret my, to myself of like, where do I want to put my time and priority and honing my skills. And a lot of our work, probably a good 80% of our work, is just adapting to the environment that's handed to us. Like, hey, come along on this adventure, and we want a video to come out the back end. And so there's a lot of thinking on your feet, and just a lot of real time, production decision making that needs to happen. And so I want to have my my gear calibrated to react to some scenarios like that. And then maybe 20% on the other end is things that we can put a lot of time and energy into pre-producing and planning and setting up shots, and bringing our crane and our slider and just doing a more elaborate production approach. But I think that based on our previous portfolio, we kind of tend to just attract more of the same, and so we kind of keep landing and different adventure tourism and kind of outdoor adventure filmmaking. And really, it all comes down to just a balance between form and content. I'm a big, I guess, kind of advocate for content first, and I don't think I'm alone in that. That, you know, content is king, and you have to always prioritize to the story and to the character and whatever's going to best connect with the character. And sometimes having a ton of gear and like a long prep time and all these things like that can suck the inspiration out of a project, or it can intimidate your characters, especially if they're not professional actors. It means a lot to be able to just jump into a scene and kind of get enveloped into the story. And so for me, that's always been the draw to wanting to be as good at handheld shooting as I can, is because I know that it's a powerful connection to the story. And then using the form specifically as a tool that's going to accomplish a certain thing, and not, you know, letting it be the standard mode of production. So a quick recap. These are my 5 bullets. Looking at my watch, I'm hitting it just about right on the mark of what I was aiming. So I feel good about that. Shoot wide-ish, but with Tamron's VC, you can get a little bit more focal length, especially with some practice. Shoot a high frame rate if possible. Know the limits of handheld, so work within your means. Don't be a gimbal. Go get a gimbal from Glazer's and get gimbal shots when you need them. Make short intentional movements. This would be a good thing to just practice. Sit at your dining room table and set out, you know, 30 little objects out on your table and just practice composing from one object to the other and adjusting your focus along the way. Ground your body and then just work your way, you know, around compositions that are within your reach. And then to move your body, not your hands. I guarantee you're going to feel dorky, especially when you're out shooting like a parade or somewhere where a lot of people are watching you and you're like shifting your hips around and you're like doing all these weird things, but you're going to last longer. Your footage is going to be better. And eventually people will probably recognize you as a professional or a clown, but it doesn't really matter because it doesn't, you're not there for them. You're there to get good content. Here's my little sign out screen. I'm on Instagram. I've got a couple websites, and I'm happy to take some questions or just chat with our crew here. So with that, thank you very much, Glazers and Tamron.
Oh, that was awesome. We have a comment from someone who's been tuning in. He talked about loving the color and the audio for the Burundi sequence and how it like matched emotionally. So that was really lovely to see that. I think as photographers and filmmakers, we do tend to put ourselves in those awkward situations where we're laying on the ground or moving our body in different ways that other people don't. You find muscles you didn't know you have, for sure. I do have a question from Whitney, who's tuning in on YouTube. And they're wondering, what audio do you use when you shoot handheld? I know I saw a recorder, but maybe you could talk just a couple of pieces of audio equipment.
Sure. Yeah, it kind of depends on the scenario. If let's say I'm following a character and maybe they have, maybe they're giving me a virtual tour of some kind, I'll lav them up and I'll record either straight into my body, or if I have a second guy with me, then we'll run double system sound to our Tascam. I think it's the DR 680 or something like that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's one of the Tascam field recorders. So I'll sometimes lav a character and just get their dialogue. I'll also sometimes run a little Rode shotgun mic off the top of my camera, especially if there's not a lot of character dialogue, but I just want to get the ambience of the space. And if I'm shooting alone. But if I'm shooting in a crew, I almost always run double system sound, and I have a sound guy dedicated to, you know, his boom pole and the big fuzzy blimp dead cat thing. And we'll get audio that way. And then the fourth would be for us to do, you know, things like ADR or Foley and kind of add the dialogue and the sound effects in post later. But as much as we can capture on location, the better. So you know, there's a variety of ways to kind of go about it. It just really depends on the scene and what's going to be the least intrusive to the scene.
Well, and that's things you learn over time, because
Totally.
you think you got it, and then sometimes you're like, oh, no, we didn't get it. Which brings me to another question from Jim. How many times have you had to reshoot a handheld sequence?
I don't know that I have a number, but it has happened many times, and unfortunately, it just sort of gets chalked up to a learning experience and, you know, a big headache. Um, I will say most handheld scenes that I've either not used or had to reshoot has been more of a focusing issue than a stabilization issue. Essentially, I mean, on the 2470 G1 was the first one with vibration compensation, and like that literally changed the game for me. And I like basically threw my tripod away, and I'm like, I'm just gonna shoot handheld, like, and I definitely pushed that lens to its limit. Um, and during that time period, I really found kind of the threshold of what that lens was capable of doing. And you know, by the time the G2 came out, I had that, you know, muscle memory pretty well established, and I don't have stabilization issues much handheld anymore, but I do quite often still shoot manual focus, and I'm not perfect, so sometimes I'll have focusing issues that, you know, my eyes just sucked that day, I guess.
And I deal with that every day.
That just
Hence the
happens.
glasses.
But it didn't happen overnight, and it certainly was a muscle that kind of had to get conditioned over time, and a sort of a confidence and maybe a calculated risk-based confidence that I kept, you know, working at it. And there have been times where I've just completely pretended like I didn't shoot a particular scene because I was embarrassed by how shaky it was back when. And that's luckily becoming less and less of an issue.
Well, and that'll just get better over time. That's more practice, more things that you learn when you do have a problem. The next time you go to do that thing, like you talked about muscle memory, you're like, oh, I know I need to do this. So I saw that you're using...
I mean, the VC keeps getting better and better too.
Right.
On the G2, like it's ridiculously good.
Well, and a lot of the cameras that you saw, if we could just take a moment to talk about cameras, is I see you with some pretty big Canon. You use some red, it looks like. Have you played around with any of the mirrorless cameras out there yet? Do you think that's going to make your life easier potentially?
Maybe. I am definitely going to get into the mirror market here pretty soon. I have my eye on a few, and Tamron's released a bunch of new mirrorless lenses that I'm drooling over that I just can't use because I don't have a mirrorless body yet. But I will. I'm certainly not anti-mirrorless. It's just not. It's not here yet for me.
Gotcha.
But one thing I have shot on a mirrorless body within the last few months, and one thing I noticed is it just felt really light for me. And part of the beauty of handheld shooting, even though you get tired, but when you have a heavier camera, like it just grounds into your posture, you know, better. And I'm able to hold a bigger camera more stably. And so I'm a little bit nervous, and I'll probably just have to recalibrate my muscles, I guess, but I'm nervous by how light the setup's going to be. And I'm not going to, I guess, feel quite as confident sort of like letting the camera lead the shot as much as it's just going to be kind of, I feel like I'm going to whip it around a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely an adjustment period. For me personally, I went from DSLRs to mirrorless a number of years ago, and it's definitely a slightly different process. But some of the techniques you talked about, like holding your arms closer to your body, I still do that with my mirrorless cameras. So, but then sometimes I use big mirrorless cameras, so you can get some big heavy ones too.
Yeah, and I mean, I've got probably abnormally large hands too. Like the 1DC really fits just my hands well. I've had, you know, the 5Ds and 70s and things, and they feel really small to me. And then now the mirrorless is yet even smaller. So
right.
I just, you know, I'll just have to learn new habits, and it'll be fine.
Well, and it's just worth maybe experimenting with, because you do travel a lot, and you know, lighter gear can be heavier, or not heavier, nicer sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I really would have liked a lighter camera while I was tromping through the Amazon jungle.
Right.
That stuff got heavy
Yeah.
fast.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to wrap this up. This has been fantastic to see all your footage and hear all these tips. For everybody tuning in, thank you for joining us today. Charley, thank you so much for sharing all this great information and for your time. We really appreciate it. And Tamron, thank you for helping make this happen. So Ben and everybody at Tamron, we love you. With that said, thanks again, everybody. We hope you enjoy the rest of your day and look for more upcoming events at glazerscamera.com/workshops. So we'll see you soon.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.